Good morning, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the keynote. I definitely did. So we're going to get started with Dr. James Collins. I have the honor of introducing him. I've known him for a few years. We both teach in the special ed department here at UW-Whitewater, and he's an amazing speaker. He is a plumber, electrician, former police officer, but no, he's an amazing gentleman and very knowledgeable in the area of behavior. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oz. Yeah, Dr. Oz owns an old house just like I do, and we share some common problems. So I've got a mic on here. If that's the gentleman in the back promised to regulate this so I would not boom your ears. My voice tends to carry. But yeah, I'm James Collins. I am a school psychologist, special educator, former school district administrator, former police officer, off-the-record plumber, electrician, all these other things. I've got a lot of interest. But my top interest is our students. And this is what I try to focus my efforts on, and both with my teaching and with my, when working with students, preparing others to go out and do the same things that I enjoy doing so much. So first of all, let me find out who's in the room, because this is kind of a broad topic. I mean, I can talk about these two things for an entire semester. So I've kind of cherry-picked the biggest pieces that I think would be most practical for y'all to use out in the classroom. But yet I've also tried to design it to give those of you who've been doing this for a while some new tricks and tools that you can use and implement out in your own classrooms too. So who do we have here? How many of you say just gen ed folks? Do we have the typical just classroom teachers out there? Excellent. That's good. I've designed part of this. Part of this is for you in mind. Great. Spec ed folks. All right. Administrators. Higher ed folks. Other. Okay, we've got a lot of other here. Parents. Got a lot of parents here too, right? Okay. So I will do my very best to make this meaningful for you. I've got a pause kind of built in specifically for questions in the middle of the session, but then I'm going to have some more at the end. So I will certainly break into some times to at least make sure that we make this something that's practical with some utility that you can apply out in your own classrooms. And I will also say that Dr. Tia Schultz, I don't know if Dr. Schultz is here. Dr. Schultz, she was coming some point. I don't see her in the audience, but her presentation, this is going to flow into hers. So I'm talking about Tier 1 and 2. So for our gen ed students, the things that oftentimes, even though it's a spec ed, there's a lot of spec ed involvement, these are gen ed initiatives, the things that we're doing. So what we're talking about here are things that y'all can apply in your own classrooms, both from with special education support, but for those students who are at risk, and even for those students who aren't at risk, for the kids that you just have some challenging behaviors that you want to address. So let me see here if we can move right on. All right. So here's the agenda, the things that we want to talk about today. And we have 50 handouts that I printed up. We just got another batch came in. I didn't realize we were going to have so many folks. So at the end of this, if that's not enough, my email is at the end. Jot it down, and I will send you a full PDF of this presentation today, so you have something you can take with you. And I've tried to make these notes kind of more detailed than I do in my own classes, simply so you can take it and use it in case we're going through this kind of quick, which I'm going to, just to try to cover the bases. So I wanted you to have something with you that you could take. So the first thing I want to talk about is an overview of challenging behavior, what it is, why it's important to actually define it, and really to make sense of it so we can figure out, kind of get inside of our students' heads to figure out what's up and why they are doing these things. And that's part of a lot of my training. I'm also a board-certified behavior analyst, where a lot of that is working with kids with the most severe behaviors, I mean, all the way down to program development at school levels for, say, intervention team stuff that we could be doing at the Tier 1 or likely Tier 2 levels there. So going to go over that, going to talk about the basic stuff, token economy, and how many times I go into classrooms and don't see things like this being used. But yet they're incredibly effective and things that we can do that also can really help us be really much more efficient with our time. I mean, how many of y'all know when we're working with students that if you have one student who is demonstrating a ton of challenging behavior, how that can kind of wreck your classroom learning environment, one kid. So the question I've got is, how much time do y'all spend with that one child that you could otherwise be spending doing a lot more important things or other things that are more useful? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So the things that I'm going to go over today, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, this takes some time to implement it. It will. It will take some time to set it up. But I promise you, and y'all can hold me to this, that it'll pay dividends as the school year goes on. If you spend the time to put something like the token economy together, it's going to take some upfront time, but it's going to spare you some change at the end of the year and throughout the school year. So keep that in mind. So we're going to go over that, and then some very specific strategies. Premack Principle, also known as Grandma's Law, some of these other differential reinforcement, non-contingent reinforcement, a lot of technical names up there, but I would be willing to bet this is stuff that you may already be doing, or at least to some extent, that you can then fine-tune and make it that much more effective. So that's what we're going to be talking about. At the very end, I got a lightning round. I call it that because I imagine we're going to be running out of time at that point, and I'm not going to have a whole lot of time to go through them, but I'm going to at least briefly cover some dimensions of behavior that you can measure that I imagine that Dr. Schultz will be picking up with and going over in much more in depth this afternoon when she goes into the Tier 3 component of this. All right. So first of all, see if this will work. There we go. Students can misbehave for a lot of different reasons, and really understanding why that student is misbehaving is critical. And I printed these up because of the level of detail. I tried not to do any, I don't think I did any more than 20-point font, so you could actually read these with 2 slides per page. I would have put note pages on there, but I didn't want you to have to break out your reading glasses or magnifying glasses to be able to actually read those. So feel free to take notes or whatever you need, or ask me if I can clarify. But basically, it's important that we understand these things to figure out what we need to do, because students misbehave for different reasons, and really the reason why they're misbehaving is really how we develop our intervention to address it. So we need to know those things to make sense of it. So that's what the function of the behavior is, right? We're trying to figure out the why. Why is this kid misbehaving? And that's the big piece of the puzzle that a lot of people miss. A lot of folks go straight to the intervention without really considering why the student is engaging in that challenging behavior. And that's kind of cart before the horse. It's a little bit of a, it's not the correct procedure that we need to follow to really pin down why the behavior is happening and what we can do to correct it. So once we understand that function, or the why, then we develop our intervention. And it's different than the consequence. And you can see it, I've kind of got it broken down there on the slides. But a lot of people think of the function as the consequence when it's not. I mean, a student might misbehave in my classroom, and they get sent to the principal's office. That's the consequence. We sent that child to the principal's office, removed them from our classroom, and they went away. But to the student, that might be reinforcing. That might actually be what that child wanted. I mean, that's where all the cool people hang out. That might be the process to get sent home so we can watch SpongeBob SquarePants, Scooby-Doo, or whatever else, right? I mean, these are the reasons. So if we don't understand that, and we might think that we're effectively punishing that child, we might not be. I mean, I've had students, good teachers who I've respected a lot, consistently sending students outside, let's say for recess, to walk the track as a punishment because they misbehaved. Have y'all heard of stuff like that? I don't know. Maybe that's just, I'm from South Carolina. I don't know if y'all can detect my accent. But that's something that was fairly commonplace. You misbehave, you would go out and you'd walk the track instead of doing the fun things that you wanted to do at recess. The problem with that is I mean, this was back at least before the fidget spinners came in. A lot of kids needed that. That's what they wanted. They would misbehave to actually be able to do that, to go out to do the. So, I mean, the teachers are creating this kind of conundrum where they're teaching the students to misbehave so they can get what they want. It's not the type of system that we really want to develop. So we need to understand why, and we need to understand what the function is, what the consequence is, and how all these things fit together. So I guess I've got a blank here that let's think of some examples. I just gave a couple, right? Maybe to go to the office to get out of that, to avoid classwork, to go hang out with the cool folks, maybe to walk the track, misbehave, to get punished, air quotes, simply so they can go out and do all these things that they want to do and interact with their peers. Any other ideas? Have y'all seen other students misbehave, maybe to go home, to be suspended, to, I don't know, to get out of math class or to avoid gym class because they don't want to go? Anybody? I mean, I know it's kind of, don't be shy. I mean, anybody have any ideas, anything that fits right into that? Yes, ma'am.
I had a 4-year-old that would have accidents because every time she did, she was too messy to clean herself up. She would go home, and she was on my caseload, and I wasn't aware that that was happening. So once we figured that out and we had her come to me instead, she stopped doing that because she would get to go home anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So there's case in point. Kind of figure out, but if you continue doing that, thinking that that was the problem, I mean, you could just be exacerbating the original issue. Thank you. Thank you. Any others? It's fairly common. Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you.
I've seen students, like, it's easier to get removed from math class than it is to get better at math if you have a learning disability or just struggle with math.
No doubt. It's easier to get removed from math class than it is to actually complete the work, right? We can be the best at something. We can get out of there and go home rather than actually doing it. Thank you. So these are some examples, just a few that kind of illustrate why kids do what they do. And a lot of these things aren't just with kids. I mean, you can test the theories that I'm about to go over today on your husbands, your spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever. These things work, and they're behavioral science, essentially, is what we're talking about. It's not quite as concrete as the hard sciences such as chemistry, but we've got a pretty strong base of research that these things are effective and that they, in fact, work. So the first thing that we need to do if we're talking about addressing a behavior is we need to define it. We need to operationally define it. And the example here that I've used is, or wait, that might be coming up on these, like punching a student, aggression, defining that, how that's observable. If you're feeling angry, that's a little bit less observable. But even before that, defining the behavior, I mean, think about, I don't know, clean. Have any of y'all lived in a frat house or a dormitory, something where you've been with other people and your definition of clean might not be exactly what theirs is? Maybe with your spouses. I don't know. What's clean compared to you compared to somebody else? It depends, right? This is something that's very variable depending on the person. So that's why we need to define it. We need to define what that behavior is, before we can actually begin addressing it, to make sure that we're doing it consistently. It's really, really important. And that's what, in technical jargon, that's called an operational definition of behavior, just defining it so we know when we see it, when we can measure it, and really prevents drift. Because sometimes if we say aggression, we're originally meaning physical aggression, but that could mean verbal aggression. So we need to be clear just so we can document correctly what's actually happening and how we are, how we're fairly addressing that if we're only targeting a specific behavior. So those are some characteristics I've got coming up here on what these behaviors should be. Should be objective to measurable. I mean, just like with writing goals, either on a lesson plan, your IEP, your individualized education programs, they're supposed to be observable, measurable, actively written, so have a specific criterion for mastery, conditions attached to those, all these things. Same thing here. We need to be precise with our language because if it's not observable, we're probably not going to be able to document it. And if we're improving it, we're not going to see it on our graph. If we were to graph improvements of this, it's not measurable, we're not going to see it. It's going to be latent, and we're not really going to know if what we did was effective or not. So let's move along and look at some of these components. So it needs to be clear, right? It needs to be very clear. In fact, it needs to be clear enough that if I'm in a corner of the room observing your classroom and you're counting these behaviors too, we should be really darn close. And in the language, in ABA, in applied behavior analysis, that's often referred to as inter-observer agreement, where two people independently watch the student. This usually happens 1 day per week in a classroom. If I'm doing a research intervention in your classroom, then I would probably come in and I'd want to observe the data collector and want to compare notes at the end. We'd both monitor the student. We'd see how many times the behavior is occurring, monitoring the occurrence, perhaps the length of the duration of a tantrum, for example, or something else. We'd both measure it and then see if it's actually, and then compare notes to see if we're close. And that just adds believability to what we're doing and make sure that I'm, in fact, seeing what actually happened. So it needs to be clear. And our students are transient, right? I mean, our kids don't just stay in one school forever. I mean, they may move around. A lot of my students, when I worked in a very poverty-stricken school, Title I, it was a very poor area. And my students would move around about every month. I mean, that every time that rent was due, I'd have a new batch of students leave and some others come in when they got evicted. And it's important to set these things up. So whether it's a behavior plan, whether it's a Tier 2 intervention, for your IEP, for your Tier 3 stuff, it needs to be clear so the next person can carry on with whatever it is you were doing effectively. And we're not starting over and reinventing the wheel. So it needs to be clear, and then obviously it needs to be complete to kind of encompass all of those components of the behavior. I mean, if we say, and I use the example coming up on task. I hate on task because it's so vague and it's so subjective. On task could mean so many different things, and we need to further refine that to make sense of it. But when we're talking about, I don't know, sitting in your seat, I mean, what if the student is sitting halfway off with feet propped up on the desk? Technically, by definition, that kid's sitting. That's not a problem. Right? I mean, so you need to be precise. You need to make sure that you think through these things to where if you're going to award the student points, give him credit, give him rewards for staying in his seat, define that. So you don't wind up with a kid sitting on the top of the desk or something like that, questioning you about that, well, I was in my seat. Right? So we need it to be complete, comprehensive, et cetera. And then it needs to be clear, and then like with the whoops. Here we go. That off task, that's the example I was kind of foreshadowing there with how I hate that, just because it's so vague, that if we say the student becomes off task during class, does he not pay attention? Does that mean eyes not on you? Is it doodling? I don't know until we break it down. So that's something that particularly that needs to be further broken down, simply because it's a weak definition. Off task to me could be entirely different to somebody else. Don't know what that means. So break it down. Be specific. Know what you're measuring. Student refuses to complete a work assignment, is doodling, or elopes from class. And eloping, that's fancy language for bolting, running out the door. It's not getting married in Vegas and taken off or something like that, right? It's much more classroom-based. And then likewise, here we go. These things all come together that then we can apply into using a token economy. So these are all very important components. Defining the behavior is kind of the first step, figuring out what we're going to measure. That's what then feeds into this token economy. So I want to spend a little bit of time with this, and this is particularly for folks at the Tier 1. For the Gen Ed folks, I wanted to come in and talk about this because I see a lot of classrooms flipping cards, I don't know, starting like with a goldfish at a bowl that gradually sinks throughout the day, and once it hits the rocks, you crash, and like all privileges are revoked, and no more for you today, mister. That kind of a system. I'm going to try my best to reframe your thoughts on this and show you a different way to do these. And that's where you can fully integrate a token economy into your classroom. Makes things so easy. Once you get it up and running, it takes some time, a bit of work at the front loading to get this thing going. We'll talk about that here in just a minute with how that in fact works. My clicker here would work. There we go. So I did have a little bit of audio there. You didn't hear my cha-ching on my computer. My apologies. But there was a cha-ching, and basically what makes the world go round, and that's money. When we talk about, and there's a lot of arguments here when we talk about using a token economy and rewarding students, but how many of y'all would show up to work, as much as I love my job, and by the way, I'm not getting paid for this. I'm here because I want to. So this is an example of me being intrinsically motivated to do something because I want to share this info, I want to help. But how many of you would show up to work 365 days a year with your bills piling up if you weren't getting paid? No. But yet a lot of us, out of the same, kind of the other side of our mouths, will say, we expect something different for our students. We expect them to just be intrinsically motivated. It's not the way the world works, y'all. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of us are intrinsically motivated. Students are intrinsically motivated. But even those students, some students are. Other students are extrinsically motivated. But even for those students who are intrinsically motivated, they're going to work harder for you. I would be willing to bet if you're able to pay them for doing what they need to do. And that's essentially what we're talking about here. I'm not talking about money, though. I'm talking about y'all setting up your own economy in your classrooms where you can effectively serve as the kind of the Ben Bernanke, the Janet Yellen here with the Federal Reserve, and you're handing out cash, even though it's not cash. But students can spend this form of cash or tokens on items or privileges that they're very interested in. And this is really the heart of a token economy. So just keep this in mind, that your classroom, with your work, with money, it kind of, it all flows together into this concept of kind of what makes the world go around, and paying somebody for something that you value and for them doing something that they value. So it does require a bit of effort setting these things up. And that's where you got to think about what the big challenging behaviors are in your classroom. And for initial teachers, I go in and I recommend maybe picking the big three issues that are the biggest concern to you, that are the most disruptive in your classrooms, whether it's blurting out, foul language, it's the disruptions, it's those things that really get under your skin as a teacher. That's what I would really focus on considering with these. But you can beef it up and include all kinds of behaviors. But start small. Start rewarding students for those behaviors that are the biggest problems, kind of the biggest distractors in your classroom. Target those, plus some. I've just given some examples here of what you could use, but inappropriate language, not responding to you, maybe not transitioning in time when you're trying to get students to move from whatever, the center time to something else, or from point A to point B. Those are things that can create a lot of problems, whether it's a big time sink or challenges getting students to listen to you, things that just interrupt your instructional time or disrupt your environment. Those are some examples. These are things that we can target. We can target these with individual interventions, but we can also kind of package them all in this token economy that we can address with all of our students. So After we identify those behaviors, we need to come up with a consistent method of monitoring them. So it's really useful to do this if we can get multiple teachers involved. Like I like to get grade level teams involved so everybody is following the same rules. Otherwise, the students will, I don't know if this is a term up here in the north, but kind of mom and popping you. You know, like where the child will go to mom and ask something and that doesn't work, they'll go behave differently for dad, and you'll see different sets of rules in different spots. It's known as stimulus control, right? I mean, y'all probably don't brake if there's an old kind of broken down Ford on the side of the road, but if you see a police cruiser, you're slamming on the brakes, right? That's stimulus control. Same thing. If they know they can get away with one thing from one teacher but not one from another, that's something that students will likely take advantage of and will treat things differently. So get a consistent system in place where everybody is defining behaviors in the same way, that what I consider, I'm just going to know the same reason as having a rubric, right? That I know what off task is in comparison to what you know what it is. And these are things that we can implement together. But if not, you can do this yourself. And that's a lot of what PBIS, I mean, PBIS dips into a lot of things that have already been out there. When you're looking at classical conditioning, operant conditioning, applied behavior analysis, PBIS has a lot of strong roots in those areas. And these are the same things that you can do at classroom level, even if your school isn't effectively a PBIS school. You can take some of those components, package it, and use them in your own classroom. So I kind of alluded to a little bit to this earlier about the card flipping practice, but the reason why that's not that great of a plan is because the systems where we set it up, where students have full access to all privileges in the classroom, is about like the same as me paying you for doing a job up front, and then whenever you don't do a good job or if something happens, I gradually take away, okay, there's a mistake, give me $10 back. Give me another 10. Give me another 10. That's a real punitive system. And that's often what happens with this card flipping system, you know, where students start on green, they start with full privileges, and then the goldfish sinks to the bottom of the bowl throughout the day, where they go from yellow to red, or smiley face, frowny face, etc. What I'm suggesting is you turn that around. And the students don't start off with a frowny face, but they earn those privileges throughout the day. And I bet that you'll see a big improvement that if you're not taking them away per se, you're just starting off on kind of a clean slate. And then students earn those privileges, and they earn those things that you give them. It's just a very different way of thinking about it. And I think you'll be surprised at how students will work to attain those things and really want to not only get these privileges, but simply just to do well. It's challenging them. It's raising the bar. Here's what we expect. And if you set the tone that way, start the classroom out, it will really set a nice structure. And this is honestly what a lot of the classrooms you see that serve students who have emotional behavior disorders, they have a lot of structure, a lot of framework. This is kind of a mini version that you can implement in your own classroom with the same types of stuff. So anyway, students probably don't like that. It's technically called response cost when you're taking money away, taking things away, and that card flipping system is kind of the same deal. So not something I recommend. So let's look at it like this. Reframing those ways, like I just said, that we're paying students for doing those things. And it doesn't, in fact, have to be a token. You can use tallies. You can use whatever you want. You can use classroom bucks. I mean, you can come up with your own currency. It does not matter what it is. Just something that you can accumulate. Do y'all use Class Dojo or any other apps like that? That has a token economy woven into it that you can involve parents. And I'll get to that here soon with how we can really deal with help effectively include parents and bolster the strength of our token economy there. So initially, when students engage in these behaviors, obviously we're paying them frequently. We're going to talk about that in a bit. We get into paying them on a very kind of a continuous level of reinforcement first to teach them the system, but then we're going to gradually ease off of that and back it off. And so these things that you're using, it doesn't matter. Tokens, tallies, stickers, it doesn't matter. These things probably have little value. I mean, I know you might not think my kids might not want any of these, but they might not want money either if we didn't associate money with buying something. All these things are going to allow our students to buy something. So it doesn't matter what you pick. It's just something that needs to really only be obtained in your classroom so students can't, do some fraudulent stuff and bring in, kind of bankroll stuff into class with some tickets or something they bought down at Dollar General, and that's what you use. You know, it's like, hey, I'm buying out the treasure box today with all these things that I got. So initially, you should layer these tokens on thick. And what I mean by that is you should give students a lot of them at first to really teach them how to do this process. Obviously, we're going to fade that later on. We're going to not give them quite as much. But initially, you're going to give them a lot of reinforcement. And that solves a lot of issues, really. It's meeting a lot of the needs of students in your classroom, for one, but the biggest part is it's teaching them. It's showing them the value, particularly the students who are the ones, as this gentleman mentioned, the ones who are struggling, and maybe the ones who are wanting to avoid your class. It's giving them a chance for some success, getting them a chance to get those privileges, the things, maybe the peer recognition that they simply haven't gotten because they haven't tried, maybe academically, they're not savvy that way, whatever. Loading it on thick initially, we're giving, once the student is engaging those good appropriate behaviors, I'm handing out a lot of tokens. Those tokens, like I say, can be tallies. I've used umpire clickers that I had for certain students I was targeting that I could click. Each time I saw that, I might give them a nonverbal, a thumbs up. I can do all kinds of things to let a student know I'm happy with what they did, and they know that means they just earned a token that they're going to be able to cash in, maybe at break, at the end of the day. Depends on how you set it up. And you could, we actually would use a cart with all kinds of goodies that students could purchase with these points. A lot of the same components of PBIS just spiraled into a smaller package for your classroom. All right, get this thing to work here. So as they get used to that, you're going to reduce the frequency that you're paying students. It's not really realistic that, my boss here, my department chair, my dean, they don't come into my classroom every hour and slap $20 on the table and say, all right, here's your pay for the hour. That's not the way that the real world works. So obviously, our goal is to transition students from something that's a little bit more contrived, like this type of a system, to something that's quite a bit more natural, like they're going to experience in the natural environment. So initially, layering it on thick, but then over time, we're going to be gradually reducing the frequency of those reinforcers to where we're not doing it so much, to where it's much more random. And if you look at behavior science, you look at, I don't know, some of y'all might be aware of B.F. Skinner, some of the original stuff that was done with behavior, and you looked at lab rats and the response rates. It's no secret that why Vegas does this random ratio of reinforcement with a slot machine. You never know what's going to happen. People tend to respond better with that type of a system. That's Vegas is the way that it is. So the goal for us then, knowing that, is to make our reinforcement system intermittent like that, where students, we're not going to say every time, this is after we've implemented it for a while, every time they do something good, they earn a point. We're going to catch them. We're going to catch them being good, much like you would with a PBIS system, and say maybe every few times, awesome job, that was a great point for you. And I might make it known, right? I might have a visual graph that has all of my students' points that they're accumulating, so we can bring in a bit of friendly peer pressure, not intense peer pressure, but friendly, something that we can work together on to do that kind of stuff. So same Vegas science, we can implement that. But the first thing is we got to make these tokens, these stickers, these tallies, these these punches, whatever we're using. We need to make these things worth something to the students. And that's where you need to spend a lot of time developing your reinforcement menu. And these, I would have mine look like a menu at a restaurant. Literally, laminated, use some of the old school equipment that you're collecting dust on in your schools, where you can laminate these things, make an actual poster with nice, colorful visual representations. Depending on the grade level, obviously, but just some examples of what you can do. And you obviously you adjust the tokens to fit the reward, to fit the kind of the rarity, how uncommon it is. And really, just to make it match. They need to match that. It's like if you tell me that I have an opportunity to make some extra money, and you're going to hire me to mow your yard, and you're going to pay me $1 to drive from Stoughton, maybe to, I don't know, somewhere else to mow your grass. But if you tell me you're going to pay me $1,000, what's your address? I'll be there in the morning, lawnmower and all, I'll be ready to go. So they need to match. It needs to be something of value. So the pay needs to match the job. So I think you need to spend some time thinking about your students, what they'll enjoy, the grade level, and what's appropriate. But just some examples here, and this is small compared to what it should be. I'm talking like big poster board size, because we get bored. If we have all the same reinforcers, the same items, the same, I don't know, we get satiated. We get bored with something if it's constantly the same thing. So give students choice and make something that'll work for all of your kids. You don't want one student to be excluded. And if you don't know, ask them. Ask your students what they like. What are some things you're willing to work for? You show me good behavior, I'm going to reward you with something. Same stuff we do anyway. And a lot of these things are things that you probably already give out, except for maybe take your shoes off. I don't know. That was just something that some kids might like. Whatever. Find out that one of my students loved that. You just find out what they like, and then, of course, you can build that into a cost. It's going to cost these things. And then anything on this menu is no longer free. We don't give these out anymore. These are things that you've got to work for, that you earn. Give students choice. A lot of students will save up and will begin saving for that biggie, maybe a class pizza party, something that they can be the hero and, in fact, treat the class to something and become king or queen for a day. That's something that you can do. Make that really, really expensive. But things, teacher cleans your desk. I mean, kids who want power, control, you can give it to them in a lot of ways by doing a system like this. But that's a reinforcer menu. So you just got to come up with not only what they like, but you got to make the cost, have it make sense, really, relative to the task that you're having the student do. So consistency is key. Just like if I come to work and some days I don't get paid, I clock in, but the machine isn't working, I'm probably not going to be loving my job, right? You need to be consistent. Students will learn a system like this very quickly. In fact, this system, I mean, the classroom can easily begin to revolve around it, and students will care more about getting points than grades. Depending on the students, I've seen it happen repeatedly, and it's one of those things that you just got to be consistent. You got to make sure that if we're offering to pay you for these things, that we're doing it effectively, and we don't want anybody to miss a paycheck per se from our students, and they will probably let you know. But the next step of this is to make it that much more effective is getting parents involved, and this is where Class Dojo, other apps, email, things that you can do to communicate with parents, very, very effective. And that's where if you have a student, or even if you don't have a student who's particularly challenging and you're just wanting to work with parents, you can go, part of your normal communication with parents obviously should be to talk about not just the bad days, but the good days too, and all the wonderful things that the kids are doing, and then also trying to address these types of behaviors. Find out what parents give them at home. A lot of parents use token economies in their house. Particularly for younger children, you can extend this all the way through adolescence if needed. It can be very appropriate. Again, depending on we can link the classroom behaviors to car keys on the weekend. Parents can do all kinds of things, and you can see this can really extend the long arm of the teacher well into the after school hours and give you a lot more control and give you a lot more leverage when you're working with the students and trying to motivate them to learn and to turn in their homework. These can be really bolstered if their conduct in school is very closely linked to their gaming time or their TV time or things like that at home. So get the parents involved with this and can absolutely connect those things. So that's kind of what I just talked about here. I put it in writing there just for those of you who are taking notes, want to take something with you. But basically, that's the gist of it. And the cool thing is, I think with a system like this, is everybody wins. The students are doing what they need to do. The parents are happy because they're probably getting less nasty grams from you every day saying, your child did X, Y, and Z, or maybe can we please talk? We need to have a conference. Come pick them up. They're suspended. All that kind of stuff. Instead, we're now working on a system that helps enable that really facilitates that student to do well for you. And that's where kind of the examples that I just talked about, it's just getting them to agree to do these things and getting them comfortable with the fact on setting up, extending this same token system that you're using in your classroom to the classroom. And again, tokens, you can use poker chips, you can use any type of play money, whatever it is, just something that's unique to your classroom that the child just can't go down to the store and buy and try to slip you a fast one there with earning all these points they didn't actually get. So before we move into the specific strategies, do we have any questions about implementing that or maybe some situations that you might wonder about? Yes, ma'am.
Can you give us a little bit of how you would do this in middle school with different teachers and teams that way?
Yeah, what I would probably do with that is one of the grade level meetings, one of the team meetings, talking about and you'll have a mix of veteran teachers, newer teachers, a bunch of folks who could put their heads together. What are some ideas that our students might actually like to come? That would be the first thing, is talking about all of the things that we could reward students with. And then as a group, I would talk about all the different behaviors that you're seeing, because you might see different behaviors in your class than another teacher sees. And honestly, that's that kind of that mom and pop phenomenon that I was talking about, that you might see students think they can get away more in one class than in another class. So I'd pin down not only what behaviors we're going to target, but defining all of those behaviors as a grade level, and then also coming up with a consistent menu that we can all use, that we can all plaster on our walls, that we're all giving points for, that they can feed into. And then honestly, a communication system. And I've used Google. You can put like an Excel spreadsheet on Google Drive where you can log student points each day. I know it's a lot of work, but I did this stuff for years, and it saved me a ton of time on the instructional end and on the end of really combating those challenging behaviors. all the time and trying to squash those so we can resume instruction and go on to the things that we want to do. So I'd work together. So the reinforcers might look kind of different. You're obviously probably won't be buying a pencil or some of the things that might really motivate a younger student in first or second grade. But you just have to think about what are those activities. It might be bringing an iPad into school or bringing an iPod or things that they might really enjoy, their favorite games, Minecraft. They could buy Minecraft time. I mean, if that's an option. Things that they just might really be motivated in. And that's really, so as a team, I just discuss those, get the system in place, and then come up with the system maybe the first week. We're going to be giving tons of points away, so maybe we need to adjust the cost, that we're going to maybe increase the cost of what might be 50 tokens. Later on, we might reduce the cost down to 25 as they get used to the system. But I just iron out the details as a team and then go from there, and then maybe meet every couple of weeks and tweak that and see how everybody's doing and really identify the students who need more supports and then begin working with them with some behavioral contracting or implementing some of the next steps for those students we're going to go over. Excellent question, though. Excellent question. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I think with that, and I've had those too. I mean, whether it's vacuum cleaners, dinosaurs, I've had all that stuff from the students. They just obsessed, could tell you all these things and really wanted literally vacuum cleaners and all the toy dinosaurs you could get. And those things, that's why I would really suggest thinking of those things and building up the menu. And even with some student who's really finicky like that, I mean, I might set up a separate menu with some extra items that they could earn. I would probably tape that on, I mean, depending on the functional level, and whether or not the student, we could put that in their folder. They could take it just as a reminder of all the things they could get. And if it's changing, I mean, I'd ask them to update it. So that one might involve more of a specialized plan for that student, following the same tokens, but they'd have a separate menu for things that they can purchase, and other students might not even know about that. So it could be just kind of fine-tuned for that one child. A lot of different options. Good question, though. Yeah, sounds like some of my students. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. It does. Yeah, and what I tell pre-service teachers is the first 2 weeks of class, their biggest thing they should be focusing on is getting the behavior, setting the tone. I mean, obviously, they're still doing instruction, but getting those behaviors in check and building rapport with parents and sending home those good notes. I mean, that you're not just contacting parents when you have a problem. You're contacting them whenever they're actually doing the good stuff. Because, I mean, if you always hear from me, and it's always, I don't want to, again, this is classical conditioning here. I don't want to associate myself with bad stuff. Every time you hear from me, it means your kid did something wrong or there was a problem. I want to contact you when you're doing good things. I want to build that initial rapport. I mean, that's just, in my opinion, that's part of the job. I don't want to just focus on the negative. So those are issues that I think that go even beyond this, and focusing on the positive and building that initial rapport with parents, getting to know the parents, knowing what they, I mean, y'all know the students better than I do. I mean, you know them, they've lived with you, they're your children, and I want to know what you know about them so I can take notes with their preferences, things that they like. But I agree, but it needs to be consistent, and it doesn't need to focus on the negative. And that's where this system is, the beauty is. It's focusing on the positive rather than taking something away or having problems. If you have problems, you're going to know it. You're just not having privileges, or you're not earning these things in the classroom, and mom and dad then could and this is something parents could request too. If this is something that would help motivate your student and the teacher, we could get them using a token economy, absolutely. 5 tokens is 30 minutes of game time. You earn it every day. And Class Dojo makes it easy, where you can get the points, but you can email it, we can use apps, we could use a little card that I initial and send home to mom and dad each day, but all of those things, but very valid points. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yep. I have, and it's, yeah, and this is, and you're right. So for those students, so we're talking some students who might have some developmental disabilities or might have some, more challenges than a typical student. What I would do is bypass the tokens initially. I mean, you're saying that they wouldn't be able to connect the tokens to a reward, or they just don't like any rewards. There's nothing that, what about even like for those students, I typically default to the one thing that I don't like doing, and that's edibles with edible reinforcers? I mean, are there something like little sweets or anything, or yogurt? I don't like doing those, but
It's very challenging because he had these meltdowns, he had these behaviors. We even tried to, like, at night, if you did these three things, like a toy, whatever, he gets, the different pieces of toys, and he eventually was just like, whatever. So it's very challenging.
yeah, that would be. And for those types of things, I mean, I've done preference assessments where I just sit an array of items out. I mean, even that we may not think would reinforce. I mean, just put an array out, and then I've often timed the number of seconds that a student will play with individual toys, and then to include for challenging scenarios like you're talking about, and put that on the menu. But the key is the student has to be motivated by something, whether it's a favorite food, favorite activity, something they're willing to work for. Otherwise, there would be some challenges with this. So that might be something that requires a bit more specialized, something like that. Yeah. Good question, though. All right. Yes, ma'am. Last one here, then I do want to move on. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Good question. Yeah, and it's something that I make very known to the students. There's no surprises that we're changing the rules of the game. That usually I frame it very positively and say, y'all have done such a good job. You know that I can't keep this up. Do y'all see the principal coming in and paying me every hour? Everybody will say, no, silly, nobody does that. Right. Y'all are doing so well. I'm proud of you. What I'm doing now is I'm going to up the ante here a little bit, and you're going to get paid. It's going to be the same amount. I'm going to lower the cost of these items. They're going on sale, but I'm going to be rewarding you a bit less often. So we would gradually bring it down, and I would do it slowly over the period of weeks, months, until it actually begins to, depending on the students, it resembles typical classroom. And it's every, I'm seeing students participate, and then maybe every third, fourth, fifth, sixth time I might say, awesome job, that was a great comment. And then I would go over 1 point for that student and just take a note. And initially, I'm making big public deals out of giving these students points, but later on, it's going to be seamless. I'm going to say, good job, and the student's going to know, ha, I got a point, and you'll see some high fives or whatever, some thumbs up in the back of the class. So it will be gradual, but it will be very positive. It will be me like complimenting them and really just showing them how proud I am that we're able to move to this, because that's what I'm on. That's the system that I use now. It's a very adult system, and I would do my best to frame it like that. Excellent question. Y'all got some good questions in here. All right, so now let's talk about some specific strategies that you can use, things that you can implement directly in your classroom here. And these, I'm going to go through these kind of quick. They're not going to take a whole lot of time, but I do want to give you a sense of what they are and how you can use them. All of these are evidence-based strategies. So the first one is Premack Principle. And essentially what that is that's a fancy word, a fancy name for reinforcing a low probability behavior with a high probability behavior. Did any of y'all's grandmas make you eat the veggies first before you ate dessert? Or your moms, dads? Somebody? Nobody? Was this just a Southern thing? Nobody? Well, okay, well, in the South, it happened to me, and it happened to a lot of people, that you need to eat dinner first, then you do the sweets. You need to do your what about homework? Do your homework first, then you can play. Premack Principle. That's what that is. It's evidence-based stuff that our grandma's parents have been using, and we probably didn't even know it. That works. It builds on that momentum that we see, that a student is doing this work, we get them to do this, and then we kind of ease them right into doing something that they really want to do, that they're willing to work for. That's something that you can do in your classroom. It doesn't just have to do with vegetables. Do your work, do your classroom work, and then we'll reward you with something else. We'll give you access to a privilege or activity, tangible reinforcer, maybe a social reinforcer, something that they might enjoy, that they hopefully will enjoy doing, that they're willing to work for. And this is all part of behavioral momentum. It's a whole other topic that you can use that, I don't know if y'all have ever had, I don't know, like with my dog as an example. I use behavioral momentum with him, that we can get him going to eat something that he doesn't want to eat. If I give him several things that I know that he's going to like, kind of priming the pump, then I can get him to eat the food or the medicine that I want him to take. It's kind of the opposite of that. But behavioral momentum, Premack Principle, both kind of flow into the same topics, and they're both really components of ABA. But really, just using a high probability behavior, something that I know the student's going to like, such as dessert, such as an activity in class. You finish that first thing that you don't particularly like, I'm going to give you access to that other thing. That's Premack Principle. And then other things that you can do are called differential reinforcement. And there's even more types than this. Differential reinforcement of alternative, incompatible behaviors, high rates of behaviors, low rates of behaviors, other behaviors, etc. I'm going to go over these and talk about each of those to give you a sense of what they are. And differential reinforcement, this is the first one, is what I probably used most. The one that this is one of my most frequently used tools out of my toolbox. If anybody in here called me to come to your classrooms to look at behavior, odds are I'm probably going to come up with some way to implement this. And really, that's just trying to identify what the behavior is that the student is doing, obviously the problem behavior. What can I come up with that's appropriate, an alternative behavior that's appropriate, that's going to serve the same function. The best example of this I can give you is a student with a very, very severe autism. This is a student who was nonverbal, very much had big sensory issues, was stemming on lots of different things, and he liked to slap people. That was his favorite thing to do. He loved the feel of slapping a teacher. So one thing that I did to replace that, and I know the teacher did not like me initially because of this, but y'all have seen those little Fisher-Price drums? Okay, well imagine one of these in your class. He was banging on that instead of hitting people. He slapped students. I mean, if he had access, he would go up and whack somebody just for the sensory input. So we gave him an appropriate alternative, and again, we had to do this in solo for a while, but then we gradually moved him from kind of banging that drum to doing this, and then to having his hand in his pocket and just tapping. It was meeting a sensory need. We gradually shaped that behavior and changed it to where it was whacking someone in the face to hitting a drum gently, right, kind of a quiet drum, and then moving that towards something that was much more socially appropriate. That's kind of an extreme case, but that's differential reinforcement of an alternative behavior. So the good thing is, ideally, that this would be incompatible too, that the student would, whatever it is, let's say it's foul language, or say getting up out of the seat. That's kind of a more common one, getting up, running around the classroom. It's incompatible if we're rewarding that student for staying seated, right? That's an alternative behavior. Can't do that. What if the student was getting out of class, getting up to, I don't know, for power or for control, because this student wanted to avoid something? What if we give him those things anyway, but we're just changing the kind of the rules of the game? That we're going to allow you to do those things, but not with you running the rules. I'm making the rules. You're going to get access to those same things that you want. It's just a matter of we reframe it to where you need to do this first, and then I give you access to that. And we're going to ignore the behavior. We're not going to allow the student to engage in or otherwise get reinforced for those behaviors unless you follow the new rules of the game and you do what it is that I'm asking you to do. So in this case, student frequently directs foul language towards your classmates. You develop an intervention that, and the student is trying to get your attention. Y'all can see this, right? You can have students misbehave, try to do things that, that can feed into either getting attention or that can get a rise out of you, or potentially to boot the student out of the class entirely because he doesn't want to be there. Can be for a variety of reasons. But in this case, if we really have a hunch this child is misbehaving to get attention, then what I'm going to do is you do something else, and I'm going to give you loads of attention for it. We're going to meet that student's need. We've identified the function of that behavior. This kid wants attention. We're going to give him attention. We're just no longer going to give it attention for these times. And I might even work with those other students who he's directing the foul language to or the things that he's saying to make sure that they're not rewarding him. I might give them points for my token economy for ignoring those types of behaviors. So I might recruit multiple students to be in this with me, and that I'm sort of, I don't want to say secretly, but off the record rewarding them with tokens that they can then cash in later for not laughing and fueling that fire, essentially, that I'm trying to put out. So it's just reframing the way that we're doing it. We're meeting that student's needs with whatever they need. If it's attention, we're going to give it to them. We're just making it socially appropriate in the way in which we're doing it. That make sense? All good? All right, that's DRA. That's a fairly complicated ABA, applied behavior analysis concept, but it's not. It's something that you are doing probably, or you can do a lot of times, things that you can do, but you're addressing the issue, bottom line with that. So another one here is differential reinforcement of high rates of behavior. And the example I love to use for this is a student who never raises his hand, a little student who's maybe meek, very timid, and you're trying to get this student to actually raise their hand in your classroom, but they don't. What I can do is I can set up this contingency that you need to ask me 3 questions, 5 questions, whatever. I want you to ask these, and I promise you, nothing bad's going to happen. Ask me questions that you may already know the answer to, that's not going to be embarrassing, or maybe if I call, let me know when I call on you, like give me a clue, give me a nonverbal cue that lets me know you know this answer. I'm going to call on you then. Give me a snap of a wristband or something that lets me know that you know this answer so I can call on you and you can actively participate just to break the ice. That could be something that if we get the student to maybe respond 3, 5 times, whatever rule you set, at that point, we deliver reinforcement. We give them the points, you give them the reward, whatever. And we can start small. For a student who never responds, I might say 1 question. That might be the rule for today or this week. 1 question in class is all you ask. You're going to get rewarded for that. Next week, you did a phenomenal job. I am so proud of you. Now you got to do it 2 times because I know that you can do it. We up the ante, and you gradually shape that behavior until it mirrors what the typical student's doing in your classroom. That's how we can get a student to increase behavior using differential reinforcement. Really, it's just getting that student to at an appropriate threshold of behavior that we want it to be at. And that's really going to depend on each individual classroom and however you need to set it up. So the other one here, differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior, is kind of the opposite. Y'all probably had that student who's always dominating the conversation, who's always wanting the attention. We can do the opposite with that student too. We can lower the threshold. Hey pal, I really want to hear you. You have got great ideas, great questions, but you are flooding the senses here, my friend. You need to tone it down a few notches. Here's what we're going to do. We'll reward you if you only ask. I don't want to suppress that behavior too much. I want my students to ask questions. I want them to interact. I want to have a meaningful dialogue, but I want to give other people turns too. And that's where we could then reward that student for not going above a certain threshold. In this case, I think I said it at 10, no more than 10 questions per class period, you're going to get some points. You're going to get 5 points from me if you do that. And then, of course, that will go into the pot that then we use to cash out. Student can choose to bank them. And so really, this token economy can really fuel into some of your talks with money, with finances, functional academics. For those of you working with students with ID or otherwise, you can do all kinds of cool stuff with this. So that's an example of DRL, or differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior. Differential reinforcement of other behaviors, really, this is one that I typically reserve for aggressive behaviors simply because it can be a tough pill to swallow, particularly for me coming into your classroom and telling you that, well, this is a pretty extreme behavior. Let's reward the student for just anything. He can do pretty much anything but this behavior for, say, a 30-minute period of time. Or maybe if it's a really intense behavior, maybe 5 minutes. We're giving this kid 5 tokens, 5 points, 5 tallies, whatever. If he does not have a tantrum, or for every 5-minute interval, the clock is running, and he earns points for not engaging in that problem behavior. The problem with that is, though, is if the student does other stuff, other things that might potentially be problematic, you would likely still be rewarding that student because he's not doing that one big behavior that you're targeting. That's the challenge with this. So let's say that we're targeting physical aggression, and the child is hitting people, is being really, really destroying things in the environment, things in your classroom. That's the big behavior that I'm working on. If that student stays in his seat and is not aggressive, we're rewarding him. But what if he's saying things that he shouldn't be saying, doing things that he shouldn't be doing, creating other disruptions? We'd probably still be rewarding that student, and that can send the wrong message. So for this, I typically reserve these for DRO, differential reinforcement of other behavior, for the most challenging behaviors, things that I can actually deal with, like the worst case scenario. I'm wanting to get that under control first, and then I'm going to address all of the others later. So that's one I typically reserve for those most challenging behaviors because you're rewarding the student even when they may be doing something that you're not too happy about, but you're addressing that core goal, that big thing that you're wanting to suppress. You're dealing with that one behavior. Another easy one that you can do that results in, it's what's often referred to in the literature as an enriched environment, it's called non-contingent reinforcement. And really, it's called an enriched environment for good reason, because you're simply enriching the environment. You're creating a very positive, an environment where students are being rewarded very often for things that they're trying to get. So let's say that, what's the ratio? If y'all have heard some of the work from Sugai, Lewis, Horner, Harrison, some of these others, what's the ratio of positive to negative comments that most teachers should make? 3 to 1? Yep, sometimes you see 5 to 1, 8 to 1, but yeah, you're supposed to give the bottom a lot more reinforcement than punishment. Y'all want to guess what I see often when I go into classrooms? It's the opposite. It's a lot of negative stuff. I might have a student sitting at a desk coloring, doing something, doing some work, doing some worksheets. That is the student in the classroom. That's the one who's the most challenging. Guess what most people do when that student's doing the right thing. Nothing. Just leave him be. He's behaving over here, right? He's doing the right thing. That's when we should be layering it on thick and teaching that child what to do, rather than the moment that that student gets up and bolts out of the classroom or misbehaves, he gets a lot of attention. That's when the classroom assistants, the teachers, all hands on deck to go deal with this child. Deal with that whenever he's doing what he should be doing and prevent that to begin with. One of the big things that we can do, and that's part of what non-contingent reinforcement can do. Except it's not really targeted. It's much more random in nature. It can be random, it can be fixed. But basically, every 10 minutes, and I've even had teachers where there's a good product called a motivator, M-O-T-I-V-A-D-E-R, I think it looks like a little pager, and it vibrates at preset intervals. It can be used as a prompt to remind you to issue a reward to everybody, like, oh my gosh, y'all are doing such a good job today, way to work, something. You're just increasing the level of positivity in your classroom, and you're meeting some students' needs. I mean, if students are wanting attention from you, non-contingent reinforcement is going to give a lot more attention in your classroom. So that's something that you can do to help up the ratio of positive to negative, just to come up with things that you can say that, may not be big, really critical areas of reward, but I like how you're just sitting there. I really like how you raised your hand. Thank you. I mean, we can go around and give specific targeted prompts of saying thank you to students, or even just to the class. Great job, y'all. I'm so proud. Y'all are on fire today. Good work. Boom. There's my big reinforcer that I gave in 10 minutes. Or I might even say, everybody in class gets a point for this. This was really nice work. Thank you for staying on task, focused on me, hard at work. Funnels right into your token economy. And for those students who want your attention, they just got it. For those students who want to work for something, they just got it. So it's non-contingent, meaning it's not provided as a result of the student doing something good. We're just doing it at preset intervals, but you can usually find things to reward in those periods of time. You can make some compliments or whatever, but you're basically just giving these at random intervals, but I use that reward both verbally as well as giving the student points, things that we can give them, linking it back to the token economy. Let's see, rationale, diminishing problem behavior, because reinforcers previously maintained the behavior now frequently available. Just went over that. Yeah, the enriched environment, went over that. Let me skip ahead. I went ahead and talked about all those, but they are certainly there for your reference later on. Here we go. Okay, did I skip? No. How much time have we got? I have until 11:30, and it is, we're moving quickly here. All right, motivating operations. These are really important concepts to consider because they alter the potency of the reinforcers that you're using. And I'll give a couple examples of that here soon. But basically, they have a value-altering effect, what I just mentioned, but they also have a behavior-altering effect, meaning that your students will likely be more interested in doing what you want for them to do if you consider these things. So they're very important. Two of those types of motivating operations are called establishing operations, or really things that make me want to do something more. They're increasing the potency of a reinforcer, or abolishing operations, things that decrease the potency, that make the reinforcers in my classroom less effective. Think about this for a minute. All right, so the big one here, and this is the big one that I would recommend that y'all consider using, those really high-value reinforcers. Take them away. Make those things the students earn, whether it's the computer time, the other things that are really high up there on the list. You earn these things. They're not freely available. And because, I mean, what if money did grow on trees? Would we all be really motivated to earn it if we could just go grab it down off of it? No. That's the concept here, right? We want to make sure that it's actually the students who are in somewhat of a state of deprivation for these items, so they'll want to do it. I believe the example I used here is, like me in grad school. I mean, that I had no time for all these other things. You better believe that I was so excited when I finally was able to go out and begin fishing, hunting, doing the things that I want to do again. Those were very valuable to me after I'd been deprived from those for a while. So it made those much more interesting. And I think that y'all can probably relate to that with something, that if you've been unable to do a preferred activity for a while, it's that much more valuable to you, right? It means that much more important. It's that much more potent. That reward is that much more potent. So whether it's reading, cooking, gardening, you've not been able to do it for a while, once you can, probably going to be that much more fun for you. All right? But on the other hand, what if we're getting access to do something all the time? It's not so much fun anymore to us, right? We're satiated is kind of the technical term for that. But basically, if the student has access to a favorite toy all the time, and then we decide to say, hey, let's reward you with this, probably not going to be that exciting to them anymore. And the example that I use here is like using edible reinforcers, and I offer to reward you with something after you've had lunch or a 4-course meal. It's not going to be that potent anymore. It's not going to be that effective. Same concept. You just got to think about how you can weave these things into your own classroom and consider the potency of things that you're doing. I'd bet that, I don't know, and if you do have to use edible reinforcers, your potential like primary reinforcers we're talking in the back, that might be most effective in the morning, maybe before lunch, that we're going to offer those things. Student might be a little bit more willing to work for you if that is the reinforcer that we were using. So yeah, it's just got to think about these things and not only think about the timing, but the student interest too. And AOs, abolishing operation, and EOs, establishing operations, were the cool jargon acronyms that I used with those. Forgive that. Running out of space, though. So another thing that you can do is, let's say that none of these work. Let's say that you need to come up with something very specialized, very specific for your student, like at a Tier 2 level, right? That we might be no longer talking gen ed setting type stuff, and we're now working maybe in an intensive intervention type program where we're working on social skills, behavior, otherwise, which is gen ed, by the way, but we're potentially out of the gen ed classroom, and we're involved maybe with a guidance counselor, school psychologist, assistant principal, somebody wanting to come up with a specific contract that you do this, then I'm going to give you this. We spell it out in writing. I have the student sign it, I'll sign it, and it's a legal document then, right? I mean, at least to my students and I, it's this is the real deal. You know, and I emphasize that once you sign this, you've got to do it. I mean, my contract, when I sign that, I can't get out of that. I mean, I could, but I'm not, and professionally, I'm not doing that. Same thing, trying to instill some of those values and the importance of this. Come up with a contract that we can use, and we can reward the student for that and take care of it from there. So it's a process of negotiation. We can link this to we can connect it to IEP goals if the student has an IEP, but it's something that y'all know that we need to have defensible data whenever we go in to make decisions, right? I mean, we can't just kind of shoot from the hip and use clinical judgment all day. We need data, and we need we need to defend what we're doing. This is one way that lets us do it. It's something in writing. It's something that shows individualization, and it can absolutely feed into a Tier 3, something with our student's IEP, if the student is already protected by IDEA or potentially with a 504 plan if we're addressing behavior with that. So yeah, very multiple areas of utility there. Just an example of a math contract. Y'all have that on your sheets. I am running out of time, so I'm going to zoom ahead from that because I'd like to leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. One of the last things that I want to talk about are group contingencies. This is where you can involve the entire class in some rewards. Whether it's in points, you can have, okay, now we're going to do this. Everybody who completes this assignment is going to get 5 points, or potentially we can target one student, let somebody be a hero, someone who's probably going to be successful with this task, going to give them this and let them be the kind of the hero and get the whole class a reward if they finish that. You got to be careful though. You don't want this to turn into boot camp where there's a whole lot of pressure on one person, but using it gently for bonuses, things of that nature. You don't want any problems at the playground to break out because little Johnny messed up the class's bonus or something. So you got to be tactful with these and careful, but group contingencies, really powerful stuff. So when I'm talking about capitalizes on peer influence, that's what I'm meaning, but it lets you target multiple students who kind of have a similar behavioral need. Could be the whole class, could be a group. We can reward them with these types of contingencies. So the first one I'm going to talk about is that one I just mentioned, that hero contingency. Essentially, the reward for the whole class is contingent upon this one student doing well. So let's say that we have problems with a student bringing in homework. We could offer to give the class is still going to get points. They're going to get bonuses. But we might say, I might talk with my student ahead of time and say, how would you feel if you bring in your homework every day this week, I give the whole class a big reward, and you're going to be a hero from this. You're going to be the rock star of the week if you do that. And I might do that every week. I might pick a different student every week. I might secretly pick a student and do things like this and say, I have a mystery student I'm targeting. You don't want to make it too big of a reinforcer, something that's going to make people mad if they don't get it, but like a bonus. We can give students bonus points, etc. So the reward for the whole group would be contingent upon that one student completing the task. Be careful of that one, though, but used carefully, cautiously, and kind of gently, you can do some good stuff. And a lot of people like the independent group contingency. That's where I offer this reward. Okay, 5 points for everybody. You finish your worksheet today, you get 80% or more, and a score of, 8 out of 10 points or more. you're going to get 5 points. Everybody who does that assignment gets the reward, gets the points, or whatever reward you choose. Those who don't, right? I mean, it's as simple as that. It's like a traditional grade in my college classes. You get a grade, your grade doesn't affect somebody else's. So you're independently completing these things, hence the term independent group contingency. Those are powerful things. And really, they feed right into a token economy, and they can address big group behaviors that you're just independently wanting to target in your classrooms. All right? And then the next one here is an interdependent group contingency. That's the last type, where basically everybody in the class is working together for a common reward. Has anybody in here used like marbles in a goldfish bowl or hung the little loops from the ceiling, and then once it touches the ground, you get the reward? Yeah, some of the same deal. That's it. When the whole work class is working together and we're feeding into this, and once it actually reaches it, once the goldfish bowl fills up with marbles or whatever, we have a massive party. We have a big pizza party. We do something big. Think of those types of things for your interdependent group contingency. We're all working together on this. We're trying to get this end goal, and we're in it together, right? I mean, it promotes teamwork. I mean, it's a lot of social skills, some soft skills you can really beef up with these types of things. And then we're doing the secret student too, and you don't know who I'm watching, but I'm going to let you know at the end of class. All right, so the last thing, I know I am running out of time here, so I want to go over, as I assumed, I'll probably be running out of time by now. I was correct. I want to just go over, as you're collecting these data, as you're thinking about how you can implement a token economy and you're tallying things, I want to briefly just introduce some ways that you can do that. So the first one, frequency or event recording, I'm just talking about the number of times. Let's say I'm counting the number of times a student gets out of their seat, number of times that a student raises a hand, number of times a student bolts from my classroom, number of tantrums in a day, whatever. That's something I can pretty easily do, right? I can tally it, count it up, whatever. But what if I'm wanting to measure the rate, I'm wanting to graph it, the rate of behavior. Let's say it's, and I'm observing a student maybe 5 minutes today, maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Rate is just simply the number of times per hour or number of times per minute. I can graph that. How many times per minute did this behavior occur? That's something I can reward progress with, right? I can graph it, and if the student is engaging that behavior more often, that can be the criterion that I use to reward points, reward privileges, whatever it is that I'm working on. Duration, length of it. Let's say I'm wanting to address a tantrum, and certainly we can address the force, the magnitude. Like there's a 10 on the Richter scale of tantrums, and there's also a 1. I don't know if you all have seen the in-betweens, but there are sometimes they can be quite severe meltdowns, or they can be pretty low level. If you think about that, that's our force. But what if I'm just wanting to measure how long the tantrum lasts, and we're wanting to see if we can reduce that, the length of your tantrums? I'm going to give you 10 points, or whatever type of system you're using, rewarding that student for gradually reducing the duration of that tantrum. So we can measure the length of it. We can measure the latency, the amount of time it takes from the, I don't have a light switch up here, but a lot of teachers, at least teachers that I've known, will flip the lights off as a cue to students to begin settling down. Let's begin moving. Let's come back to the carpet here and get ready to line up for recess. A lot of students take some time, and they're kind of the stragglers. It can take a long time to do that. We can measure the amount of time from the time that I give the command, let's move, let's all go out in the hallway, to the time it takes that student to move. And we can set a target for that student, and if that student moves, maybe this week your target is you got 20 seconds to begin moving from the time I give the cue. If you do, you're going to get 5 points, and this could be on a student's separate little sheet they keep on their desk. The next week, it might be 15 seconds, 10 seconds the next week, whatever. We can gradually begin shaping that behavior and rewarding that student appropriately by improving their latency here, by taking less and less time. We can measure the amount of time between hand raises. That's your inter-response time. Magnitude, kind of the intensity of a tantrum. We can rate that on a rating scale. And then the topography is really just the kind of the shape or the form of the behavior that we're measuring. A lot of y'all might have students who use American Sign Language. Others students might communicate with PECs. They might communicate with, I don't know, some text-to-speech software. That's just the topography, and we can define that, and then, of course, identify how we want the student responding, etc., things of that nature. So those are just, that was the lightning round, because I wanted to go through this quickly. But just to get your brain flowing here with some ideas for how you can measure this stuff, some ideas to just get you going. And literally, I could talk about this stuff for a whole semester. So this is, tried to package as much useful stuff as I could, given the amount of time. And that's all for now. But if y'all have questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I work here. I plan on being here for a while at least, so don't hesitate to let me know if I can help you. And I see a few of my former students in here too, so good to see you again. So hope that y'all have a nice rest of the conference. Please head to Dr. Schultz's session. She will kind of follow up with the Tier 3 stuff. And at this point, I know that I'm down to 2 minutes, and some of y'all have other places to go, 1 minute, but I will be more than happy to entertain questions. I will hang around until the last question is gone. So thank you. Have a great rest of the session, and hang out for questions afterwards. All right? Thank you.